Now we go to the second presentation today. Moisei Ginzburg, a Russian architect who was born in 1892 and died in 1946. So let's say he was born today on the 4th of June, but with the old system of counting time was the 23rd of May. But we use the present day system, it's the 4th of June in Minsk, and he died in 1946 in Moscow. Was a Soviet constructivist architect, best known for his 1929 Narkomfin Building in Moscow. This was the man, and he is important for the history of modern architecture. You see him with this group of other architects from that time in Russia, and that finger points towards him. He's right at the center. So Ginzburg was born in Minsk into a Jewish architect's family. He graduated from Milano Academy in 1914 and Riga Polytechnical Institute in 1917. During Russian Civil War, he lived in the Crimea, relocating to Moscow in 1921. There he joined the faculty of, it's hard to read that, but it was a very famous avant-garde school, Temas, I can't pronounce it, and the Institute of Civil Engineers, which eventually merged with Moscow State Technical University. Even now, the Russians have a very avant-garde school, Strelka, which means Sajata in Romanian. Beautiful school. We need such a school in Romania too. Ideologist of constructivism. So he is considered an ideologist of constructivism. We remember that constructivism had a great impact on the deconstructivist architects at the end of the 20th century. Not just Bernard Tschumi, but Zaha Hadid was highly influenced by Malevich, for example, and so on. So the founder of the OSA group, Organization of Contemporary Architects, which had links with Vladimir Mayakovsky and Osip Brick's left group. He published the book Style and Epoch in 1924, an influential work of architectural theory with similarities to Le Corbusier's Vers une architecture. It was effectively the manifesto of constructivist architecture, a style which combined an interest in advanced technology and engineering with socialist ideas. The OSA experimented with forms of communal apartments to provide for the new communist way of life. Its magazine SA, or Contemporary Architecture, featured discussions of city planning and communal living, as well as the futuristic projects of Ivan Leonidov. The group was dissolved in the early 30s into an all-union association of architects, along with the competing modernist group Asnova, led by Nikolai Ladovsky and the proto-Stalinist Vopra. When I read these texts, I realize again and again that we need this kind of fresh spirit in our country too, and in the world in general. If you have interesting ideas to communicate, organizing groups, meet at cafes, virtual or real, debate ideas, write manifestos, express yourselves. Narkomfin and the social condenser. This is what this person wrote, Charlie Clemoes, the social condenser. Now, derelict, Moscow's Narkomfin Building was once a potent expression of the social condenser, an approach to building which sought to engineer a new, more socialist community. And here it is. I know that as Romanians, we are adverse to communism and socialism, but theoretically, at least, there were some valuable elements in them, like the equality of all people. What's wrong with this? Why should one be unbearably rich and one unbearable poor? Theoretically, at least, things were not so bad. Unfortunately, they were applied badly, in our country as well. So the social condenser remains one of architecture's purest experiments in social engineering, emerging from the revolutionary ferment that followed the First World War. Its essential purpose was to break down social hierarchies and bolster a new working class consciousness in its residents. Probably the most well-known example is the Narkomfin Building by this architect from 1932, so 90 years ago was built. A block of flats located on the Novinsky Boulevard in Moscow, designed by Moisei Ginzburg and intended for high-ranking members of the Commissariat of Finance. So again, this was not actually and unfortunately built for the poor, it was built for a social elite and political elite. The building's most striking feature is that none of its 54 housing units had a dedicated kitchen. Can you believe it? Well, you better believe it. And I was told by someone who was invited in Zaha Hadid's apartment in London, which was very spacious, she didn't have a kitchen either. Instead, the building was built with communal kitchen. So a kitchen at each floor, a communal kitchen, laundry and creche facilities, a move which was intended to socialize the kind of reproductive labor that was traditionally carried out by women at home. Meanwhile, a bid to stimulate an ethos of self-improvement and a new, more socially engaged lifestyle, the building also featured the library and the gymnasium. And here it is. It was actually refurbished, but it had many years of neglect. It still stands, and Le Corbusier admired very much this building. The Narkomfin Building echoed similar experiments happening at the same time in other cities led by socialist administrations. In Vienna, for instance, in Austria, the interwar period saw a tenth of the city rehoused in so-called Gemeindebauten, housing which aimed to transform the city's working class through embedded social and cultural institutions. So in a place like Rabenhof, located on Vienna's so-called Ringstrasse des Proletariats, residents had access to a theater, which transformed later into a cinema, along with a kindergarten, 2 playgrounds, and communal kitchen and laundry facilities. Evidently, the social condenser enjoyed quite a moment in this period, but it also endured in the Soviet space long after, albeit in a somewhat less radical form, especially after the Soviet Union took a more socially conservative turn under Stalin. Indeed, while the attempts to liberate women from domestic labor were left out, the post-war period saw the construction of many interesting new residential and cultural buildings, which sought to engineer an emboldened working class culture, particularly in the new socialist societies of Eastern Europe. After the fall of communism, however, the social condenser's fundamental purpose quickly proved totally out of step in cities that rapidly adapted to a more capitalist model of urban development. If they can get away with it, developers operating in a capitalist urban development framework will always build buildings which make little affordance for the wider social functions which the social condenser offered. So this talk about the social condenser, I think, is important. And perhaps you should continue the discussion between yourselves, because yes, architecture should have social concerns, and experiments are also welcomed. I went with architecture students to Vienna 3 years in a row, and we had a collective or a common shared kitchen on each floor. And it's very nice, actually, You meet the other people, sometimes you smell what they cook, they smell what you cook. Let's hope that smell is, enticing. You could have discussions around the big, heating machines, or not heating machines, but cooking machines. Anyway, let's not be too nostalgic, but what I'm saying is don't take for granted any kind of easygoing scheme and say that that's it. No, there is room for experimenting. So this building today, in this new context, it should come as no surprise that most residents vacated the Narkomfin Building years ago, and the structure has fallen into a state of disrepair, despite being listed as a cultural heritage monument on the Russian Cultural Heritage Register. Now the building has the dubious honor of sitting on top of another less illustrious still list, UNESCO's endangered buildings. I think they restored it. Yes, here is still affected by time and neglect. Interestingly, things have recently come full circle in contemporary architecture's fixation with densification and the so-called mixed-use development, which bears some striking similarities with a social condenser. The fundamental difference is the underlying social reality within which these respective design approaches operate within. Whereas the social condenser, whereas the social condenser was envisioned as a space to realize a new, more emancipated working class subject, the modern day mixed-use development is overwhelmingly targeted as boogie young urban professionals. In other words, the former is exclusive of bourgeois ideology and the latter is thoroughly stepped in it. And it's true, there are mimicking efforts in our capitalist society, but it's not the same thing. Here it is, refurbished and it looks fine. And it's indeed a monument to a societal vision, which is worth contemplating and exploring.